Welcome to the Adventure Travel Show podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. On our last episode, we learned how to plan a walking holiday, and part of that was training, which reminded me that training is a really important thing that we need to do for all of our adventures. So with that in mind, and with the fact that I'm still trying to get back into gear from my big trip, we're going to revisit how to train for an adventure holiday. This episode actually first appeared on my Active Travel Adventures podcast in May of last year. So actually, it does belong on this podcast actually more than the other because the other is more destination-based. So anyway, with that in mind, let's learn the different things we need to think about and do in order to train for our next adventure. Because as you know, challenging adventures are a lot more fun if your body's geared up for it. So let's get started.
I'd love if we can do a mind shift here for people looking at trips. And instead of looking at the trips that you can handle, find a trip you actually can't tolerate, you're not ready for now, and prepare for it because it will just open up all the opportunities. If somebody has only done a level 1 trip and they want to do a level 5 trip, my philosophy, as long as you're generally healthy, and even if you've had certain surgeries and things like that, it's not completely disqualifying. And especially if you're generally healthy, you can train for it and you can do it. You just have to apply the right stresses to the body. Your body will adapt and you'll be able to enjoy your trip.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and my mission is to bring you epic but doable adventures from around the world. If you're like me, you don't want to live an ordinary life. You want to live a kick-ass life. And one way to do so is to add adventure travel to your life. Of course, adventure travel is really fun, but it also has brought me greater self-confidence and feelings of empowerment. But before we actually go on any of these adventures, we need to prepare. And so today I brought on an expert on training for adventure travel. His company, Fit for Trips, is specifically geared towards people like you and me that have an audacious adventure travel goal. So Marcus is going to take us behind the scenes of what we need to know and think about as we prepare and train for our adventures. And also I learned a bunch of things that I didn't know that I didn't know. After we shut off the recording, Marcus very generously offered all ADA listeners a 10% discount. So I'll put the promo code for that in the show notes and on the webpage. And if you forget, it's ADA KIT 10, ATA for Active Travel Adventures. KIT, K-I-T, that's my name, 10. So it's ADA KIT 10. And again, don't worry about that. I'll put that in the show notes and on the website. So let's get started on learning what we need to know and what we need to do in order to train for our next adventure. One of the biggest fears and worries that I hear from you guys is that you're worried that you won't be able to do some of the adventures that you want to do. Or you're worried that you're going to hold up the rest of the group by being slow and at the back of the pack all the time. To help alleviate those worries and to make sure you're ready for your next adventure, I've asked Marcus Shapiro to join us today to speak with us about getting in shape for your upcoming adventures. Marcus is a personal trainer and has been for over 25 years. And since 2009, Marcus and his team at fitfortrips.com have been helping folks like you and me get physically ready for all the great adventures in our lives. He received his BS in athletic training and shortly afterwards earned the Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist designation. Marcus, welcome to the program. Could you please tell us what that designation means? That sounds really important, but I don't really know what it means to us.
There are a lot of certifications out there, but early on I recognized that the NSCA was one of the top organizations. And I'm pretty sure that at least at the time, and I'm not sure now, but the Olympic organization, many of the colleges, if not all of them, required strength conditioning coaches to have the CSCS designation or certification under the NSCA. It was one of the few at the time that required, I believe it was 2 years at a university. So it wasn't, it couldn't just be a hobby. Training couldn't just be a hobby like it can be now and you can get your certification. And having just gotten out of the university scene, having worked with athletes and strength coaches that had that designation, it just made sense to me because it was an important ambition of mine. And I wanted to do it right. So that's why I chose that one.
Yeah, because I know it's super important to have somebody that really knows what they're doing when you're doing some of these things that are pushing your body. And I've heard of horror stories of people that hired a quote unquote personal trainer that wasn't really skilled and they actually got hurt rather than helped. And so I want to make sure everybody here today knows that you are definitely the person we should be talking to understand what things we need to do to get our bodies in shape for our adventures. So thanks for coming on the show, Marcus. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
Why is it important for us to make sure we're in the right shape for these adventures? Like, what's the benefit for us to put all this hard work in before we go on these adventures? What are we doing this all for?
Well, I think you and I have similar intentions. I mean, you serve the adventure community by providing information about itineraries, trip experiences, and kind of the on trip situation, whereas my specialty is kind of the pre departure phase. So, I want to make sure that people have the proper training so that they can enjoy the itinerary as the tour operator designed it. I mean, these are unbelievable trips that, of course, the tour operator takes a long time to put together. And so most of them have a lot of magic and sizzle, and they're intended to provide incredible experiences. So I want to make sure that people are ready, that they enjoy it, that they have energy, they can be in the moment, and that they don't get hurt while on the trip. And people don't want to hold up others in the group. They have kind of those insecurities. And so that kind of gives them the self-assurance, even prior to departure, that things should be fine. And when they step out first day on that trailhead or whatever kind of challenging obstacle, having trained properly gives you that immediate confidence and kind of gets your mind set and ready to enjoy and take it all in.
So if we've decided we're going to go on this trip in the future, do we just kind of beef up what we're normally doing, or what do you recommend? Or how do we go about thinking about it? Let's pick a trip. Let's take a hard one. Let's take Kilimanjaro. And for those that have not listened to it, that episode is a fascinating episode on how to train and how to achieve, and that will motivate you if nothing else we do today. If you're thinking, all right, I want to do Kilimanjaro, where do we go from there? What do we do? What's our thought process?
You want to look at elevation changes, elevation gain and loss. The terrain, altitude is a big consideration. You need to contrast kind of where you live and where you're going to be going. And you need to find ways that you can mimic the stresses that you'll encounter on the trail. And if we're talking specifically about Kilimanjaro, you're really going to find where you live that you're going to have all those challenges. So you have to trick the body. You can do that using the staircases. There are things in the gym that you can do. The treadmill is not the end all be all, but we can always get into why that is. It's definitely helpful. You can use other modes of training. They're not going to directly help you, but biking and swimming has, kind of serves its purposes as well. But, and of course, that's where Fit for Trips comes into play. Of course, I help you figure all those things out. But you can do it on your own, and there are resources to figure that out.
Well, it's hard without having an individual trip in mind and knowing the people's, like you said, their location or their fitness levels. But so you kind of assess where you are, where you're going, and then do you break it down? How do you figure out how long you need to train for an event? Is there any kind of rules of thumb there?
Well, let's take Kili, for example, and perhaps we can work back from there. I've helped over 300 people with training programs for Kili, and there's some things that I've kind of figured out along the way. Because initially when you start out, there's really, at least when I started out, there weren't a lot of resources that helped me figure that out. But over time, with anecdotal feedback, my own experience, and some science, of course, I was able to get a pretty competent plan for that and figured that out pretty quickly. So with Kili, I have people train, let's just kind of take a 12-week program, okay? Which you have to have a pretty good base if we're talking 3 months that you're going to begin to refine. So oftentimes people have a good base if they're considering Kili, not always, but if they do, it's then time to go ahead and refine your training program. So maybe in the first month, you want to, once a week, you'll want to find one hiking day for 3 hours. Then from 5 to 8 weeks, you're going to want to find one time a week you will hike for 4 hours. And then about 4 weeks prior to departure, you need to get into the 5 hour range. Now, it doesn't sound like enough, but you have to take the total volume of work throughout the week and all the little variables that you throw in. So, for example, you're going to want to do the treadmill once a week. The treadmill provides the incline necessary so that you can kind of lengthen and strengthen the Achilles, the calf muscles, and the muscles on the bottom of your feet and in your hips. You do not get the same stresses as you would climbing on hills. There's something missing. I don't want to get too geeky, but it's called ground reaction forces, which means when you're pushing down against the ground is theoretically pushing back on you and you propel yourself forward. If you think about the treadmill, kind of think about that. Everybody who's listening, when you've been on a treadmill, you're not really pushing off. You're just kind of keeping up with it. But you can get the incline, which is important. And again, this can go for just about any hiking or trekking trip, but we'll just use Kili as an example. So you've got your hiking once a week. You've got your treadmill once a week. Then we want to add in stairs. And the reason why you want to add stairs in is for several reasons. One, you're going to get on the ascending portion, you're going to get strength and endurance. There's so many repetitions up the stairs that you're not going to just get strength because you have to lift your body weight up each time. But you're going to do it so many repetitions, you're going to develop an endurance component as well. And if you do different creative things on the stairs, like taking 2 stairs at a time, and if you're tall enough, sometimes 3, you can really work the hip and the knee joint at 90 degrees. And there are certain portions of the trail when that's certainly helpful. The other benefit from stairs, and this applies to most hiking and trekking, and especially Kili, is now you have to come down. And whenever you come down the stairs, you're working on what's called eccentric strength. And so that's the ability to put on the brakes so that you don't go tumbling down. You've got gravity kind of pulling at you every step. And you have to be able to tolerate your body weight and gravity and prevent your knees from buckling and from you stumbling. So that's kind of the third component. Fourth component would be resistance training. So that's going in the gym and that's really loading your muscles. Not so much machines, but more weight-bearing type lunges and squats are most beneficial. You can do balance exercises as well on single leg and do some interesting things by standing on uneven surfaces to incorporate a balance component. There's a fifth component, and that would be high-intensity interval training. So now what you're doing is you're developing cardiovascular fitness. And in this particular case, it doesn't matter what mode of training. So while biking does not train you necessarily directly for trekking, your cardiovascular system, you can challenge it with high-intensity interval training some people call it HIIT training. And so, for example, you might go on the bike, you will ride very strenuously for a minute, and then you will rest completely for a minute, and you might do that 10 times. And that's just one example. And then I would say maybe a sixth component is when you're doing your long hikes, what you're doing is you're not really developing endurance, but in some ways you are. You've got your connective tissues and your tendons and all your joints. They just have to be able to tolerate walking for long periods of time. So whereas short durations and intense durations in the gym, while harder in some cases than hiking is just you've got to be on your feet for a long period of time when your hike or trek has many miles or hours per day. So that applies to Kili, but you can actually take that formula and apply it to hiking, trekking, and then if it's backpacking, and if it's hiking with a day pack, you've got to take that into consideration. It's critical. Your joints and your muscles have to adapt to that prior to your departure. It's not something you can do quickly on the trail.
No, that was excellent. And I would like to reinforce what you just said about not just showing up with a pack. I unfortunately did that when I did the West Highland Way in Scotland. I was like, it's not a very difficult. It was long. It was almost 100 miles, but it wasn't, big inclines and declines and all that kind of stuff. And I did not train, just showed up, and I brought a bunch of electronic equipment. So all of a sudden I had, 30 pounds on my back without training, got a meniscus tear, and it put a damper on what was a great trip because I didn't properly prepare. So I want to emphasize that you do need to train. But what can we do, Marcus, if something like that, I had this great opportunity to go, but I didn't have a whole lot of time. Can you kind of speed things up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely analogous to studying for a test. It's hard to cram for fitness, but I will say this. There is an initial level of soreness that you can begin to deal with. If everybody can probably relate, when you first start exercising, you develop a day or two later, it's called delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS. And you will feel sore and uncomfortable after that workout. But then as the week goes by, and even the second or third or fourth week, you don't really feel that anymore unless you completely change your workout up. So if someone's like going on a trip and they're like, oh, it's just too late, I only have, 4 weeks or even 3 weeks. It's not, because there's this initial level of soreness that you perhaps can get rid of before you even hit the trailhead. And then when you're on the trail, it might be that you've done enough stress, you've applied enough stress to your joints and muscles that you're now have adapted to it. And that in itself could make a difference.
Say the local gym's got a personal trainer. How can we tell if that person can be any good, or how do we evaluate a personal trainer? Is it just accreditations, or can we tell if there's certain things they're doing? We say, oh, if they don't know what they're talking about, or I remember back, I think it's one of those, the Taibo or something like that. Just a lot of people got hurt training people in this thing, and they didn't seem to know what they were doing, and people got hurt.
Let's quickly go back to when I first started training back in '93. All we had were muscle and fitness magazines. I don't even think there were personal training certifications back then. It was just more of group fitness certifications. And it was not completely the wild, wild west, but we were trying to figure it out. And I remember, although I had a lot of training in college, it didn't initially prepare me for the mindset of how to bring value to a training session. And so I'll admit, when I first started, I thought, well, one way to provide value to a client is if you just work them so hard that it's not something they could have pushed themselves to do on their own. And in my mind, that was part of adding value. And of course, knowledge and so on and so forth. But fitness has evolved so much now. It's so much more fun. It's so much fun for me now that there are just better certifications, which perhaps we can name those now or at the end, perhaps. Also, there's philosophies that evolved, and with science, people are kind of ahead of the science a little bit. I go on forums and I talk with professionals in the industry, and there are things that they've found out anecdotally in their gym that work fantastic. I'm kind of going off topic a little bit, but I just wanted to share that with you. But that's something that you need to be aware of, is some people getting into it might still have that mindset. They're just going to work you really hard. And you have to, a couple ways you can, I think you can avoid that is first of all, there's an evaluation. Make sure that they're asking you questions. It's not necessarily enough just to do that without filling out these long forms or having them ask you questions about medical history, past exercise history. And the first session is not the opportunity for them to really work you hard. It's more of an evaluation. They should take you through movements, sometimes gentle, just to see how you respond to them, just to see what your movement quality is. And also experience. You might get lucky and find a real ambitious person, because now in the universities and even some certifications are much more competent than they were back in the day. So you could get lucky and just stumble upon somebody that's competent.
I'll list all the various certifications on the show notes and on the corresponding webpage, which will be activetravelaadventures.com/training. So that way you can better gauge what the education level is of any trainer that you're considering hiring. Now, how important is stretching? And when do we do it? Before, after, or both? Or what's the story on stretching?
I'll tell you what, the debate still goes on about stretching. But I would say the conventional wisdom on stretching now is, and are we talking about before a workout? Are we talking before hikes, or both?
Let's talk both.
So I would say that prior to stretching, I think it's better that you get some good movements in first. It's not always necessary, but not such a bad idea to start on some kind of cardio equipment. And then do some movements. And again, some people aren't strong enough. listening to this perhaps to do some lunges and even to do body weight squats, but maybe so. But those are some good movements to start doing. And then not always critical, but at that time you can stretch. But if you go into your workouts where the intensity, let's say ranging from easy to very hard, if you can start all of your exercises with an easy to moderate kind of subjective intensity, and I say subjective because it's hard to quantify that exactly with heart rate or with how much resistance somebody should be using. But let's say easy to moderate starting out, you can work into a workout without stretching. Whereas on the back end is where I think it's most beneficial to stretch. And let's say you're then preparing for a hike. Sometimes it can be the same thing. You kind of work into the hike and you may or may not need to stretch, but it might even be, you might use the same thing you do in the gym. Maybe get a little walking in, some squats, some lunges, then you do your stretches, and then you should go for your hike.
And how important is having rest while you're training? Are rest days something that you should be doing regularly, or what's the story on rest days?
Yeah, rest days are critical because it's that recovery time where you're actually getting the benefits from all the stress and strain that you're putting on your body. I would say when it comes to resistance training, if it's the same body parts, and a lot of times I'll do a full body, I'll encourage people along with all the other activities, they can do during the week to enhance their fitness for their trip. I like people to do resistance training, usually twice a week, doing a full body program. I usually like 2 to 3 days between so that you get the full recovery so that when you perform your resistance training again, you feel 100% and ready to work hard again. You're going to have to listen to your body as well. If you're not recovering quick enough and you're sore all the time, then you're not getting enough rest and recovery. And then there's a term called active recovery. So recovery doesn't necessarily require you to do minimal to zero intensity work. You might do a hard, high intensity interval training session or a hard resistance training. Perhaps you climb stairs. The next day, just going on an easy walk or an easy bike ride or something like that could actually help promote recovery, and we call that active recovery.
What about lactic acid? I get massages every once in a while, and they say, you got to flush out the lactic acid. What is it, and is it something good or bad?
I think they've kind of debunked the whole lactic acid chemistry component, and that being kind of the source of the soreness. But let's just put it this way. You mentioned massage. Massage is fantastic for recovery. If you can afford to get a massage regularly, that's fantastic. I would encourage that. But people tend to overthink things like foam rollers and those kinds of devices. But those are just massage tools. It's just that you can do them on your own. So I think it's great to get massages as part of your recovery if you're willing to make time for it and have the finances to go ahead and actually have a human being do it.
On my recent trip to New Zealand, somebody brought some of those rollers, and they really do work pretty well.
Yeah, they do. And I actually like them before working out as well, especially around the hip joint, around kind of the glutes, like sitting on a foam roller and getting your glutes, muscles around your hips kind of loose to kind of promote kind of an elasticity in those muscles. Those muscles generate a lot of force, and they're very important, especially when preparing for hiking, trekking. And if you have it at your disposal, use it. And you could probably to incorporate that into the warm-up. We talked about maybe using a cardio piece of equipment for a few minutes and then doing some movements, some light lunges and squats. And that might be a time to get into foam rolling. Although you can switch that around, you can foam roll before you even get to the movements as well.
Is there any particular brand you like, or does it make a difference?
It doesn't make a difference. Just keep in mind that there's different densities when it comes to foam rolling. There's just some basic generic ones. Typically, they're white, and they are not very dense. They're good for beginners. I find that the black colored ones seem to be more dense, and they also, and both of those are usually inexpensive. And also there is I believe Hyper Ice is the company, and I'm sure there are others. and it's one that vibrates. That's pretty cool. And they also make different sizes. So I'm thinking maybe 1.5 feet. And then there are ones that are 3 foot. I think I'm getting that right. 3 feet in length. So keep that in mind, especially if you're going to travel with them. That's an important consideration.
I once had a masseuse recommend bringing a tennis ball and rolling around on that. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that. Except you're working on a small surface area. So think of tennis ball is not that dense, whereas a lacrosse ball is very dense. A lacrosse ball would be like if somebody was doing massage and taking their thumb and really digging it deep into your muscle. That would be more of a lacrosse ball. Tennis ball is similar, but it's not as dense. Someone can tolerate that better. And then the easiest thing to tolerate, of course, is more of the foam roller style. So yes, I like it. You just have to experiment and see if you can handle it.
And how much time is all this going to take us? It sounds like we had the one long day that gets longer as our training extends, and then every day we're doing a little something. So what's our time budget for all this stuff?
That's a good question. So I would say that if you're doing let's say a multi-day hiking trip, and maybe you'll be doing, let's say, 3 hours a day, and it's maybe 3 days of hiking. And this is just kind of general. You could get away with 3 days a week. One day should definitely be a walk/hike with some pack weight. Not everybody has stairs, but I'd really encourage you finding them. That could be a parking garage. It could be an office building. And it could be even a single flight of stairs. And it's a means to an end. So, of course, it's boring. But all they would need to do is listen to your podcast while doing it. And that would pass the time. And then I would perhaps add maybe 1 day of high-intensity interval training on a bike, kind of non-weight bearing. So that way you might give yourself a little relief. So I've mentioned 2 weight-bearing activities. That would be stairs and the hike itself, and then the high-intensity interval training on the bike. Now, with any of those, if you, let's say, want to condense your workouts to 3 times a week, you can easily incorporate some resistance training, again, balancing, lunges, squats, on 2 of those days. And also, we've talked about, okay, what you can do on those 3 days. Depending on the trip, you also sometimes you can substitute the treadmill for the stairs if it's not that intense of a trip, because what I failed to mention there in that 3 days a week is if you live somewhere where you don't have an incline, you do want to mimic that kind of stress. You do want to put the stretch on the Achilles and the calf. So a treadmill is probably important to incorporate as well.
What I have done in the past when I was training is I would join the local gym to use the treadmill. I think it went up to 15% grade with my pack. And then each week I would just increase the weight on my pack. Was that smart or not smart, or is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, so most treadmills seem to go up to 15% grade. And if you have the time, you want to start working at, maybe 3 to 5% grade and work up to maybe, if if you're lucky enough, you started soon enough, 1% or 2 incline each week is probably good enough to adapt for adaptation. Because if you start on the treadmill at a 15% grade, and that's kind of the first exposure you give yourself to the treadmill in a long time, you might start walking incorrectly to accommodate it. You may not have the calf strength or the strength at the bottom of your foot to be able to keep your feet at more of a north-south kind of straight ahead. When you walk, you might have to turn your feet out and really change your gait while you're stressing and straining yourself because you're thinking, all right, 15% grade is great. I need to do that, yet you're going to change how you walk isn't the best thing. So I like 15% grade. I would just work up into it. I'd say the same about pack weight. It's always good with pack weight also if you can overcompensate. So if you're carrying a day pack and let's say it's 10 pounds, if over time in your pre-departure phase, you can work on adding 5 to 10 pounds more than what you'll carry, I think you'll appreciate that come day one.
You just validated what I do, because I work up to like 36 pounds when I'm just going to be carrying a day pack because I live where it's perfectly flat. So even though I'll do some stair training and do some treadmill, it's just not the same.
Yeah, and let me just mention, for anybody listening, you live in the city and you are really busy and you're always working and you don't think that you can get out, you really can't get out from hiking much. I'll tell you, I've gotten many people get to this summit of Kili that just trained in Central Park, didn't have any more than the inclines there, but did all the tricks of the trade in the gym and the staircases and overcompensating with pack weight, and was still able to thoroughly enjoy the trip. In your Kili episode, the woman learned and really encourages people that they can do anything that they want to do. And I agree with that when it comes to the training variable. I'd love if we can do a mind shift here for people looking at trips. And instead of looking at the trips that you can handle, I really love the fact, of course I'm biased, this is what gets me all excited, and that is find a trip you actually can't tolerate, you're not ready for now, and prepare for it, because it will just open up all the opportunities that you have. So all the tour operators have these trip ratings, and you've mentioned it before in your podcasts, and I think you rate trips on your own. Well, if somebody has only done a level 1 trip and they want to do a level 5 trip, as long as you're generally healthy, and even if you've had certain surgeries and things like that, it's not completely disqualifying. And especially if you're generally healthy, you can train for it and you can do it. You just have to apply the right stresses to the body. Your body will adapt and you'll be able to enjoy your trip.
And they'll probably actually enjoy it more because they have pushed themselves. That sense of achievement will be that much more if they did something they thought they would never, ever be able to do in a million years.
Oh, yeah. And it completely opens up the door for other adventures, for sure.
Definitely. And again, I do encourage people to listen to episode 23 that was part 1 of the Kilimanjaro series, where Cindy was an overweight couch potato that, through the help of a personal trainer, made it to the top of Kilimanjaro 7 months later. And it's an extraordinary story. Even if you have no interest in climbing Kilimanjaro, it's one of my favorite episodes, and highly recommend you go back and listen to that. Speaking of Kili, though, one last thing. Is there anything you can do to help yourself train for any altitude? We don't do a lot of altitude type trips on this program, but a lot of people have Kili and other ones with altitude issues. Is there anything you can do?
Well, I think a couple things. You just have to show up. You have to be in tip-top shape when you experience that challenging altitude. So let's say, for example, you start the trail and you get to the end of the day and you haven't, and by the next, okay, so you go to sleep, you wake up the next day and you're sore and you haven't fully recovered. You're not feeling as energetic. That's when I'd be concerned about altitude, because soft tissue hasn't recovered. So it's not necessarily going to get better along the way. Your energy systems have not fully built back up again. And so now you get into altitude where there's less oxygen now. And oxygen's an important component when it comes to creating energy. It's not the end all be all, but it's important. And if you're not a finely tuned machine, when you hit that altitude, you could experience some rather very bad symptoms. And the other thing too is the psychological, and that's where I really like high intensity interval training. So you can really train very hard, really get your respirations and your heart rate up very, very high to a very uncomfortable place. And psychologically, I think when you experience the altitude and you experience some of those symptoms, emotionally, you can keep yourself in check and feel confident that you can tolerate it.
Now, what about, are trainers able to help you? Let's say you don't belong to a gym, but you hire somebody to help you. Or do you need special equipment, or do you have to join a gym to do this stuff? Or can they work around that?
When I craft my programs for people, it's a very important question. I mean, I don't want people to have to join a gym if they don't already, unless they want to do it so they can add variety to their program. And there are some tools in the gym that do make training easier, but it's not necessary. So when you don't belong to a gym, if it's a trip you're going on that doesn't have a lot of elevation gain, you're totally fine, because you're just going to walk around your neighborhood. You can do body weight resistance training exercises. Again, I keep saying squats, lunges, balance exercises. You can find probably a flight of stairs. If not, go to the high school, maybe even get some stairs there. And those components can allow you to enjoy a multi-day trip and something even up to 3, even a level 4. And so even a level 5 trip, you don't need the gym. But on a level 5 type trip, it's really helpful to have access to, even if you don't have hiking, real rigorous hiking trails, you do want to find some hills where you can do ascending repeats, walking, or I was listening to your Machu Picchu episode, and the gentleman talked about hills. I think they lived in Florida, and they would run up the hills. And that's very helpful. You get a really good physiological changes muscularly and cardiovascularly when you add that. Again, none of that involves the gym. Gym adds variety, might keep somebody more interested and motivated, but it's not critical.
And how important is it to have a plan, or in fact, probably a written plan?
Well, yeah, I think it's important because typically a written plan allows you to add what's called periodization to a program. So that means that you're, just in general terms, you're increasing the intensity over time. So you're going to increase the duration of something. You're going to increase the weights of something. You're going to increase the incline on the treadmill over time. You're going to increase your pack weight. All of these things, it's helpful to have documented in kind of an incremental way so that you can see kind of the progressions that you'll be working. Or if you don't have a written plan, you're writing it down as you're going so that you can build usually every 4 weeks or so, adding some intensity over time and volume, the amount of work you do.
I will attest that it does work. Back when I was about to turn 50, even though at the time I didn't hike, I didn't bike, I didn't swim, all I did was walk a little bit, I decided I was going to do one of these sprint triathlons to commemorate my 50th. So I found this couch potato to triathlete in 12 weeks, and I just did every single thing it told me to do every single day. And the goal was not to win, it was just to not embarrass myself. And it helped. And I liked having something to cross off every day and saying, okay, this is what I got to do. So it was very helpful for me to have a step-by-step plan that said that if I did this, I could do it. And it gave me the confidence to do it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. It does give you that confidence level that if you try to create your own program and you develop it kind of out of thin air, you don't have the security that if you actually are going to put in that time and effort, if at the end you're actually going to achieve your goal. And to have a written plan gives you the confidence at the beginning, and more importantly, gives you kind of the stick-to-itiveness to say, well, okay, week 1 and then go to week 2 and stick with it because you're confident that you will achieve the goal in the end.
And one last thing about that, I remember in Cindy's episode, her trainer did little micro goals because to put the huge goal at once was overwhelming to her. So they just had a goal for a month because remember, she did not even move. And so for her to visualize herself on that mountain was almost impossible. But he's like, can I get you to 2 miles this month? And then she's like, yeah, I think I could do 2 miles. Even though she did 0, she could visualize 2 miles. She just couldn't visualize Killy.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, if you just tell people that you have to work up to, climbing 45 minutes of stairs and 5 miles of hiking with a 25-pound pack, that's pretty difficult. But if you break it up into increments, then as she experienced, you'll feel this, self-assured and trusting, able to move forward. Sure.
Is there any important segment of training that I neglected to ask you about, or anything else you want to input about what we should be thinking about as we try to prepare ourselves for any of these adventures?
I think that you don't want to have a black and white mindset of training in that, well, if I can't train, I'm not going to do something. I have to be all in. I think what I would say is the importance of kind of mental fortitude. You want to be as prepared as you can, and you want to train, you want to have a competent plan. But sometimes you train and you have to realize that sometimes you need a little mental toughness. And as much as you've trained, there was just something unexpected. And, you might just have to push through it. But being in shape gives you the confidence to push yourself. And in those moments, you can overcome obstacles and manage to recover the next day, even if it was unexpected, if you've trained properly.
So if let's say I want to go to Machu Picchu, I'm gonna do the Inca Trail. So if I wanted to go to Fit for Trips, what do I do? Or walk us through that program and what is it that you guys offer?
So when you get to the site, you're going to pick, there's anywhere from 4 to 12-week programs. And if someone wants to go beyond 12 weeks, then I can coach somebody up pretty easily beyond the 12 weeks. So that's not a problem. But let's go beyond that. When somebody signs up, I want to make sure that I'm able to collect their medical history, exercise history, how many days a week they're going to train, what days of the week that they're going to train, what equipment they have available. Are they going to be at home? Or are they going to be at the gym? And that's all once I've created an account for them. So it just kind of funnels them through all of those questions. And it's usually just a checkbox for each of those things. And sometimes there's an open field to share a little bit more. So that is step number one. Once I get that information, then I will craft the program. And the program is in 2 components. One of them is an endurance component, and in a really cool, easy to follow chart that allows you to access it in several different ways. So that if you're on the go, if you can't look at your computer, you can look at your phone, or if you want to print it out. So learning's not an issue, and that's important to understand. The other thing is the resistance training component. That's a completely different chart, and that involves some written explanations, but the main thing in that is video. So you have 2 components. So once you've answered the questions, I've crafted the program, you look it over, we get on the phone, and we talk about it in detail. Make sure that you understand it. And then because I've crafted it and I've customized it, then we stay in touch over time. And anytime that we need to chat, we set up an appointment. And we talk about whatever it is that you need to discuss. And if I need to make any modifications, perhaps maybe you're going out of town, maybe you got sick a week, or maybe there's certain exercises that aren't working, or you're traveling somewhere where that doesn't have certain equipment, then because I have created the program from scratch, it's so easy for me to go in, make the modifications, and you log back in, and there's your new program. And I have the proprietary software created from scratch. So I had it made so that it's the way that I think people will learn, understand, and access programs the easiest.
Now, on those videos, is that so that we can see how to do it, so we do proper form, and how do we make sure we're doing things correctly?
The form, looking at the videos. That's the thing about online training. Online training is not for everybody. So if you have to have a trainer, then actually I have worked with people, they said, Marcus, I want your knowledge. I want the programs. And because they're easy enough to access, you can give them to your trainer. So if somebody's really uncomfortable with following a video on how to do the exercises, which I think the explanations are really good, then you can do the collaborative approach. So you'd get a trainer, they'd show you how to do or watch you doing the exercises to make sure that you're doing them right. But I find that typically the people that engage with me and work with me, they seem confident enough by following the video. But there is, like I said, another way to collaborate.
Yeah, I would imagine most of your clients and most of the people that listen to this program are self-starters. They know how to achieve a goal. And you also have a pretty sharp team there. You've got not just yourself, you have an outdoor expert, a cycling expert, a paddling expert. You want to tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
So I'm the main trainer. So what I do is I will interface with all of the clients. I'm the one crafting the programs. So anybody listening to this, you're actually working with me. And so with those experts, I reach out to them in their fields. If I have a question about a particular itinerary or I just want to get confirmation on something related, then I'll reach out to those folks.
So if people want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
They can go to fit4trips.com. That's not the number 4, that's FOR. So fit4trips.com. And there are several places there where they can email me and access, or they can go info@fit4trips.com, or my name is Marcus, Marcus at fit4trips.com.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure I have those links in the show notes and on the website and on the planner for this episode. Any final thoughts for our listeners today?
And the other thing, too, is there are consultation forms on there. I really like that. That's a lot of fun for me when I get to engage with people. If you're wondering if Fit for Trips is right for you, and you're not sure, consultation is a great thing to use, because there are times when I'm talking with somebody and I feel like they've got a good base and they just need a little information, and we'll have that conversation, and that's the end of it. And sometimes people want to talk to me to see if I have the competency to answer their questions, and if so, then we move forward and we start working together. So utilize that. It's a lot of fun for me, and I think you'd enjoy the conversation.
So do you feel confident that folks that are listening that want to do a really killer adventure, that you or somebody like you could get them in shape if they follow the program so they can achieve that dream?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think your podcast is a great resource, because there are things like Fit for Trips and other resources where by listening to your podcasts and looking at just trips online, or any friends that have been on trips and have told their friends to do it. Yeah, as I said earlier, my philosophy is generally healthy. Whatever trip you want to do, you just go for it. And there are the resources out there to help you. Absolutely.
I found Marcus's insights super helpful, and I hope you did too. Marcus and I chatted for quite a while after the recording was done, and not only did he offer us the 10% discount that I mentioned earlier, and again, that promo code is, you go to fitfortrips.com, and the promo code is ATAKIT10, A-T-A-K-I-T 10, and that's the numeral 10, and that will get you 10% off if you decide to do any of his custom regimens. And I found the price to be very reasonable. And when I mentioned that I was going to be going on a week-long rafting trip, and mind you, the longest I've ever whitewater rafted before was 4 hours, and now I'm going to be going out on a raft for 7 days, I had no clue how to prepare for this and what muscles, and I just didn't have a clue. He generously offered to comp me that. So that's one of the perks, I guess, of doing the podcast. So anyway, so he's going to walk me through and set up a training regimen for me to do this rafting trip that I'll be doing in Idaho. And also, very generously, he, at no additional cost to you folks, will pay Active Travel Adventures a small commission as an affiliate link. So if you do decide to use them and you go through my links, you'll be helping to support the program, which is basically a labor of love. Outside of, like I said, every once in a while I get some nice perks and the occasional small commission, but every little bit helps. The costs do add up. And so if ever you're doing any of these kinds of things, I encourage you to use my links. They do help little by little to help support the program and the overhead costs of the website and the podcast, etc. Well, I hope you learned a lot from Marcus today on how to train for your next adventure, and I hope you're enjoying the Adventure Travel Show podcast. We're about 6 months in on this program. I'd love to get your feedback. Is it helping you prepare better? Are you learning some great things? What else would you like me to do? We're coming into a banner year, 2020. I mean, a decade change. I just feel like we need to do something momentous. So if you've got some thoughts on that, please reach out to me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I always love getting your emails. I read all of them, and they help me adjust and tweak the show to give you exactly what it is that you're looking for. So with that, until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.